Beneath a Crimson Gaze. Arlington, 1921. Samantha Reed noticed fresh footprints in a quiet park leading to a stone bench inscribed with Private Leon Carter, as if a ghost had briefly passed by. Chapter 1. Footprints in the Dew. The dawn broke over Arlington, painting the sky in soft hues of rose and gold, a gentle prelude to what Samantha Reed knew would be another day of quiet contemplation. The dew clung to the grass, heavy and glistening, each blade a tiny, shimmering mirror reflecting the burgeoning light. She walked her usual path, the one she'd taken nearly every morning since she'd needed a reason to leave the house. Arlington National Cemetery was more than just a resting place for the fallen. It was her sanctuary, a place where the silence was filled with echoes of stories she felt compelled to understand. Samantha, at 58, carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied the turbulent emotions that often churned beneath. Her silver hair, neatly pinned beneath a simple, dark hat, framed a face etched with the delicate lines of time and a subtle, lingering sadness. Her eyes, though still of vibrant blue, held a depth of sorrow that mirrored the countless graves she passed each day. She wore a practical, dark gray dress, its high collar and long sleeves a subtle armor against a world that had taken so much from her. Today, however, something was different. Something had disrupted the familiar serenity of her morning ritual. As she approached the secluded bench nestled beneath a sprawling oak, a bench she'd often paused at, a bench dedicated to Private Leon Carter, she noticed them. Footprints. Clear, distinct impressions in the dew-laden grass, leading directly to the stone bench and then vanishing. As if whoever had stood there had simply dissolved into the morning mist. Samantha stopped, her breath catching in her throat. The air, usually crisp and clean, felt thick and heavy, charged with an unseen presence. She knew the groundskeepers. They were meticulous, respectful, and their work began later in the morning. These footprints were fresh, too fresh to have been made by anyone but a recent visitor. A visitor who had come and gone, leaving no trace but these ephemeral marks. She slowly knelt, her gloved fingers tracing the outline of one of the prints. It was a man's boot, she guessed, judging by the size and shape. Military, perhaps? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. So many soldiers rested here, their stories buried with them. But Leon Carter, his story, had always felt unfinished, a loose thread in the tapestry of her grief. Leon Carter. The name resonated with a peculiar ache in Samantha's heart. He wasn't a relative, not in the traditional sense. He was a connection. A young soldier her son, Thomas, had befriended during the war. Thomas, her bright, brave Thomas, had not returned. Leon, according to the official telegram, had fallen just weeks before him. 2 young lives extinguished in the mud and blood of the Somme. But unlike Thomas, whose grave in France she had visited, painstakingly traced his name on the stark white cross, Leon Carter had no body returned. Only this bench, this memorial, a placeholder for a grief that felt incomplete. It was his mother, a frail, heartbroken woman named Elsie, who had arranged for the bench. Elsie had passed away a year ago, her spirit seemingly unable to bear the weight of her loss any longer. Samantha had promised Elsie, on her deathbed, that she would visit Leon, that she would keep his memory alive. Samantha stood up, her gaze fixed on the bench. The inscription, Private Leon Carter, seemed to stare back at her, cold and unyielding. Yet those footprints, they suggested something else. Something almost hopeful. A foolish notion, she chided herself. Ghosts didn't leave footprints. Grief, however, could play cruel tricks on the mind. She sat on the bench, the cold stone seeping through her dress. The silence of the cemetery pressed in on her, yet it was a different silence than usual. It was a silence pregnant with questions. Who had been here? And why? Was it just a random visitor, paying their respects? Or was it something more? The sun climbed higher, burning away the dew, and with it, the footprints began to fade. Samantha watched them disappear, feeling a strange sense of loss. It was as if a tangible link to a mystery was dissolving before her eyes. She pulled a small, worn photograph from her pocket. It was a picture of Thomas, taken just before he shipped out. He was smiling, his eyes full of youthful optimism. In the background, slightly out of focus, stood another soldier. A tall, lanky figure with a kind smile and eyes that seemed to hold a hint of melancholy. Leon Carter. Samantha had only met Leon once, briefly, when he had come to their home with Thomas on leave. He had been polite, respectful, and there had been a quiet strength about him that had impressed her. He had spoken little of the war, but his eyes had told a different story. A story of horrors witnessed, of innocence lost. She tucked the photograph back into her pocket, her fingers lingering on the smooth, worn leather. A sudden, impulsive thought struck her. The groundskeeper. He might have seen something. He might know who had been here. It was a long shot, but it was something. A thread to pull, a path to follow. With a renewed sense of purpose, Samantha rose from the bench. The footprints were almost gone now, barely visible in the rapidly drying grass. But they had left their mark, not just on the dew-laden ground, but on Samantha's heart. They had stirred something within her, a flicker of hope, a spark of curiosity, in a world that had long felt shrouded in darkness. She started walking towards the small cottage near the cemetery gates, where old Mr. Abernathy, the groundskeeper, lived. The sun felt warm on her back, a gentle encouragement. The mystery of the unseen footprints had begun, and Samantha, the quiet, grieving widow, was about to embark on a journey she could never have anticipated. Chapter 2. The Gardener's Silence. The walk to Mr. Abernathy's cottage was a familiar one, yet today it felt different. Each rustle of leaves, each chirp of a bird, seemed amplified, imbued with a significance Samantha couldn't quite grasp. The air, still carrying the lingering chill of the early morning, felt charged with anticipation. She adjusted the small, black handbag she carried, her fingers brushing against the worn photograph inside, a tangible link to the past and, perhaps, to the present mystery. The cottage, nestled amidst a riot of colorful flowers, was a picture of quaint charm, belying the somber nature of the grounds it served. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something else, something vaguely floral, perhaps the remnants of a breakfast tea. Mr. Abernathy, a man as weathered and gnarled as the ancient oaks he tended, was known for his early rising and his solitary habits. Samantha knocked gently on the wooden door, the sound echoing in the quiet morning. A moment of silence followed, then the shuffling of feet and the creak of the door opening. Mr. Abernathy stood there, his eyes, pale blue and slightly watery, peering at her from beneath bushy, gray eyebrows. He wore his usual attire, worn overalls, a faded flannel shirt, and a pair of sturdy boots that had seen countless seasons. "Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice a low rumble, tinged with surprise. "A bit early for your usual visit, isn't it?" "Yes, Mr. Abernathy," Samantha replied, her voice calm and measured, despite the tremor of unease she felt. I saw something this morning. Something unusual." He raised an eyebrow, a silent invitation for her to continue. "Footprints," she explained, leading to Private Carter's bench. "Fresh ones in the dew. But they just vanished." Mr. Abernathy's gaze shifted, his eyes focusing on a point somewhere beyond her shoulder, as if searching for the phantom prints in the distance. He remained silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Samantha felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. She had expected something. Surprise, perhaps. Curiosity. But not this silence. "Did you see anyone, Mr. Abernathy?" She pressed gently. "Anyone at all near the bench this morning?" He finally looked back at her, his eyes holding a strange mixture of what? Pity? Regret? Something else. Something she couldn't quite decipher. He shook his head slowly. "No, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any inflection. "I saw no one." Samantha felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that he would have an answer, a simple explanation that would dispel the unsettling mystery. But his silence, his evasiveness, only deepened it. But the footprints, she persisted, they were there. I saw them. The dew plays tricks, Mrs. Reed, he said, his gaze unwavering. Makes things appear that aren't there. Shadows, reflections, memories. His words struck a chord within her. Memories. Was that all it was? A manifestation of her own grief, her own longing for answers? But the footprints had seemed so real, so tangible. Thank you, Mr. Abernathy, she said, forcing a polite smile. I must be going. She turned to leave, feeling a sense of defeat settle over her. But as she took a step, Mr. Abernathy spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. Some things are best left undisturbed, Mrs. Reed. Samantha stopped, her back to him. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. She slowly turned back, her eyes searching his. What do you mean, Mr. Abernathy? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. He looked at her, his pale blue eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored her own. But he didn't answer. He simply shook his head again and closed the door, leaving Samantha standing there, alone in the morning sunlight, with more questions than answers. The scent of wood smoke and flowers no longer seemed comforting, but rather a subtle shroud, masking a secret that Mr. Abernathy, the silent guardian of the cemetery, seemed determined to keep. The walk back to her small house was a blur. Samantha's mind raced, replaying the conversation, searching for clues, for any hint of what Mr. Abernathy had meant. His silence, his evasiveness, his warning, it all pointed to something more than just a figment of her imagination. He knew something. He had to. As she reached her front door, she noticed a small, white envelope tucked beneath the doormat. Her name was written on it in a neat, unfamiliar hand. She picked it up, her heart pounding in her chest. It was unstamped, undated, meaning it had been delivered by hand. With trembling fingers, she tore open the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A short, cryptic message was written on it. The past is never truly buried. The words sent a chill down her spine. They were a confirmation, a validation of her suspicions. The footprints were not just a trick of the dew. They were a sign, a message from a past that was refusing to stay silent. And Samantha, drawn into a mystery she didn't understand, knew that she could no longer ignore it. She had to find out the truth about Private Leon Carter, even if it meant unearthing secrets that some, like Mr. Abernathy, believed were best left undisturbed. The envelope and message now joined the photograph in her bag. The day had started with unseen footprints. It was ending with a far more ominous mystery. Chapter 3. Letters from a Lost War. The small, unassuming house Samantha called home felt strangely alien as she stepped inside. The familiar scent of lavender and beeswax, usually comforting, now seemed to mock her unease. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a steady rhythm of passing time, felt like a relentless countdown to something. She placed the cryptic note on the small table in the entryway, its stark white paper a stark contrast to the dark, polished wood. The past is never truly buried. The words echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder of the mystery unfolding around her. She moved to the sitting room, the heart of her quiet life. Sunlight streamed through the lace-curtained windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room was filled with the ghosts of memories, a worn armchair where Thomas used to read, a faded tapestry depicting a pastoral scene, a bookshelf overflowing with well-loved volumes. But today, these familiar objects offered no solace. They felt like relics of a life that had been irrevocably altered by the war. Samantha knew she needed to do something, to take action. But where to begin? The footprints were gone, Mr. Abernathy was silent, and the note offered only a cryptic clue. Then, her gaze fell upon a small, wooden chest tucked away in a corner of the room. It was a chest filled with letters. Letters from Thomas, letters from Elsie Carter, letters from Leon. She hadn't looked at those letters in years. They were too painful, too full of the raw grief of loss. But now, they felt like a lifeline, a potential source of answers. She knelt before the chest, her fingers tracing the smooth, worn wood. The scent of aged paper and dried lavender wafted up as she opened the lid. The letters were neatly organized, tied together with faded ribbons. She carefully untied the bundle marked Leon. There were only a handful, perhaps 5 or 6, written in a neat, precise hand. They were all addressed to Elsie, Leon's mother. Samantha had kept them after Elsie's death, feeling a sense of obligation to preserve this last connection to the young soldier. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a pang of guilt. These were private letters, intimate words meant for a mother's eyes. But the urgency of the situation, the weight of the unanswered questions, pushed her forward. She had to know. She unfolded the first letter, dated June 1916, just months before Leon's reported death. The paper was thin and fragile, the ink slightly faded. My dearest mother, the days here are long and filled with a strange mixture of boredom and terror. We wait, we train, we wait some more. The rumors fly like shrapnel, each one more frightening than the last. But I try to remain strong, for you, for Thomas, for the hope of a future that seems increasingly distant. Samantha's heart ached as she read those words. The youthful optimism, the underlying fear, the desperate longing for a future that would never be. She continued reading, each letter a glimpse into Leon's world. A world of mud, trenches, and the constant threat of death. He wrote of the camaraderie between soldiers, the shared hardships, the small acts of kindness that kept them going. He wrote of Thomas, praising his bravery and his unwavering spirit. He wrote of his longing for home, for the simple pleasures of life, the smell of freshly baked bread, the sound of birdsong, the warmth of his mother's embrace. But there was something else, too. A subtle undercurrent of unease. A sense of something unspoken, something hidden beneath the surface of his words. In one letter, dated August 1916, he wrote, "There are things here, Mother, that I cannot write. Things that I can barely speak of, even to myself. Things that haunt my dreams and shadow my waking hours. I pray that one day I will be able to tell you everything. But until then, please know that I am doing my duty, even when that duty feels impossible." Samantha reread that passage several times. What were these things he couldn't write? What was the impossible duty he referred to? A knot of suspicion tightened in her stomach. This was more than just the usual horrors of war. This was something specific, something personal. She continued reading, searching for more clues. The last letter, dated September 1916, just weeks before his death, was the most unsettling. "Mother, I fear I have made a terrible mistake. I have trusted someone I shouldn't have. I have become entangled in something dangerous. I cannot say more, for fear this letter will be intercepted. But if anything should happen to me, please know that I did what I thought was right. And please forgive me." Samantha's hands trembled as she finished reading. This was it. This was the confirmation she had been seeking. Leon's death was not just a random act of war. It was connected to something else, something he had become involved in, something he regretted. But what? And who had he trusted? She carefully folded the letters, placing them back in the chest. The answers she knew were not here. Not entirely. But they were a starting point. A trail of breadcrumbs leading her into the heart of the mystery. She stood up, feeling a renewed sense of determination. She would find out the truth. She would uncover the secrets that Leon had carried to his grave. She owed it to him, to Elsie, and to the memory of her own son. The cryptic note, the gardener's silence, and now these letters, they were all pieces of a puzzle she was determined to solve. Her next step, she decided, would be the War Office. It was a long shot, but perhaps, just perhaps, they held records, documents, anything that could shed light on Private Leon Carter's final days. The war was over, but for Samantha, a new battle had just begun. Chapter 4. The Widow's Photograph. The War Office, an imposing edifice of gray stone and towering columns, stood as a stark reminder of the bureaucratic machinery that had fueled the Great War. Samantha felt a familiar wave of apprehension as she approached the building. Its sheer size and the somber atmosphere that permeated its surroundings were intimidating, a testament to the power and secrecy it held within. She clutched her handbag tightly, the worn leather a comforting presence against her gloved hand. Inside, nestled amongst the cryptic note and Leon's letters, was another photograph. Not of Thomas this time, but of Elsie Carter, Leon's mother. It was a picture Samantha had taken herself a few months before Elsie's passing. Elsie had insisted, her frail voice filled with a desperate plea. "Take it, Samantha," she had said, "so you won't forget me. And so you won't forget Leon." Samantha had almost refused. She had enough reminders of loss. But looking into Elsie's tear-filled eyes, she had relented. Now she was glad she had. The photograph, a simple portrait of a grieving mother, felt like a talisman, a connection to the woman who had entrusted her with Leon's memory. The interior of the War Office was a labyrinth of corridors, echoing with the hushed sounds of footsteps and the murmur of voices. Clerks in neat uniforms hurried past, their faces etched with an air of officious importance. Samantha felt out of place, a small, solitary figure amidst the bustling activity. She approached the information desk, her heart pounding in her chest. A stern-looking woman with tightly permed hair and spectacles perched on her nose looked at her expectantly. "I'm here to inquire about a soldier," Samantha said, her voice trembling slightly. "Private Leon Carter." The woman's expression didn't change. She simply reached for a large, leather-bound ledger and flipped through its pages with practiced efficiency. "Regiment?" she asked, her voice devoid of any inflection. "The 12th, I believe," Samantha replied, recalling the information from Leon's letters. "The 12th Northumberland Fusiliers." The woman continued her search, her fingers tracing the lines of neatly written names. Samantha waited, her anxiety growing with each passing moment. The silence of the room felt oppressive, broken only by the rustling of paper and the distant tapping of a typewriter. Finally, the woman stopped. She looked up at Samantha, her expression still unreadable. "Private Leon Carter," she said, her voice flat. "Killed in action, September 27, 1916. Battle of the Somme." Samantha nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She already knew this. This was the official story, the one she had been told years ago. But she needed more. I understand that," she said, "but I'm looking for more information. About the circumstances of his death. Any records, reports, anything." The woman frowned slightly. "Those records are classified, madam," she said. "Only available to immediate family." Samantha felt a surge of frustration. She had anticipated this. But she wasn't giving up. "His mother is deceased," she explained. I was a close friend. She entrusted me with his memory." She pulled out the photograph of Elsie, holding it out to the woman. "Please," she said, her voice pleading. "Anything you can tell me." The woman hesitated, her gaze shifting from Samantha to the photograph. Elsie's face, etched with grief and a quiet dignity, stared back at her. For a moment, Samantha thought she saw a flicker of empathy in the woman's eyes. Just a flicker, but it was enough. "Wait here," the woman said, her voice slightly softer than before. She disappeared into a back room, leaving Samantha alone with her hopes and fears. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Samantha paced the small waiting area, her gaze fixed on the closed door. She imagined the files, the records, the secrets that lay hidden within those walls. The truth about Leon, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and wartime secrecy. Finally, the woman returned. She held a single, thin file in her hand. Samantha's heart leaped with anticipation. "This is all we have," the woman said, handing the file to Samantha. "It's a brief report, filed by his commanding officer. It's not very detailed." Samantha took the file, her fingers trembling. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the neatly typed words. It was, as the woman had said, brief. It confirmed the date and location of Leon's death, stating that he had been killed by enemy fire during an advance. There were no details, no specifics, just a cold, clinical account of a young life extinguished. But then, at the bottom of the page, something caught her eye. A handwritten note, scrawled in pencil. It was barely legible, but Samantha could make out the words, "Circumstances unclear. Further investigation warranted." Samantha's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the confirmation she had been looking for. Leon's death was not as straightforward as the official report claimed. There were doubts, questions unanswered. And someone at some point had thought it necessary to investigate further. Who wrote this? She asked, pointing to the note. The woman shrugged.
I don't know, she said.
It's unsigned. Probably just a clerk, making a note. But Samantha didn't believe her. The note felt too significant, too deliberate, to be just a casual observation. It was a clue, a hidden message, buried within the official record. Is there any record of this further investigation?
She asked.
The woman shook her head. Not that I can find, she said. If there was one, it's likely been lost or misplaced. Samantha felt a surge of frustration, but also a renewed sense of determination.
She had found something.
A crack in the official narrative, a hint of a hidden truth. She wouldn't let it go. Thank you, she said, closing the file. You've been very helpful. She turned to leave, the file clutched tightly in her hand. As she walked out of the War Office, the gray stone and towering columns no longer seemed so intimidating. They were just a facade, hiding a world of secrets and unanswered questions. And Samantha, armed with a widow's photograph, a cryptic note, and a handwritten scribble in a dusty file, was determined to uncover them all. The further investigation mentioned may have stalled years ago, but Samantha knew hers was only just beginning. Chapter 5. Whispers at the War Office. The file from the War Office, though meager in its official content, felt heavy with unspoken significance. Samantha walked briskly, the London streets a blur of activity around her, her mind fixated on the scrawled note. Circumstances unclear. Further investigation warranted. Those words were a key to unlocking the mystery surrounding Leon Carter's death. But where did that key fit? She decided to return to the War Office. Not to the official reception area, but to the periphery, to the places where whispers and unofficial conversations might be overheard. She remembered seeing a small tea room across the street, frequented by clerks and lower-level employees during their breaks. Perhaps, amidst the clatter of cups and the murmur of gossip, she could glean some further insight. The tea room was bustling, filled with the aroma of strong tea and freshly baked pastries. Samantha found a small, unoccupied table near the back, strategically positioned to overhear conversations without drawing too much attention to herself. She ordered a cup of tea, her hands still trembling slightly from the encounter at the War Office. She sat there, sipping her tea, her ears straining to catch any relevant snippets of conversation. Much of it was mundane. Office politics, complaints about superiors, discussions about upcoming social events. But then, she heard it. A fragment of a conversation between two young women, their voices hushed, their expressions serious. Heard it was hush-hush, you know? One of the women said. Something about a spy ring. Back during the war. Really? The other woman replied, her eyes wide with interest.
Who told you that?
My uncle, the first woman said. He used to work in records. Said there were files, missing files. About soldiers who weren't who they seemed to be. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the connection. Leon's impossible duty, his terrible mistake, his involvement in something dangerous, it all pointed to espionage. She leaned closer, trying to catch more of the conversation. They say some of them were double agents, the first woman continued. Working for the other side. Nasty business.
But what happened to them?
The second woman asked. No one knows, the first woman said. Disappeared, most of them. Their files vanished. Like they never existed. The conversation drifted to other topics, but Samantha had heard enough. The whispers in the tea room had confirmed her suspicions. Leon Carter had been involved in something far more complex than just ordinary soldiering. He had been caught up in the shadowy world of wartime espionage, a world of secrets, betrayals, and deadly consequences. Samantha finished her tea, her mind racing. The missing files, the hush-hush nature of the investigation, the rumors of double agents, it all painted a picture of a conspiracy, a cover-up.
But why?
What was so important that it had to be buried? erased from the official record. She left the tea room, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had a new lead, a new direction to pursue. But she also knew that she was venturing into dangerous territory. The world of espionage was not a place for amateurs. It was a world of shadows and lies, where the truth was a slippery, elusive thing. As she walked, she considered her next move. She needed to find someone who knew more about this, someone who had been involved, or at least had access to the information. Someone who could tell her about the missing files, the double agents, the hush-hush investigation. Then it struck her. Mr. Abernathy, the silent groundskeeper. He had warned her to leave things undisturbed.
He had known something.
He had to. But how to approach him? He had been so evasive, so reluctant to talk. She needed something to gain his trust, something to convince him to share his secrets. She returned home, her mind buzzing with possibilities. She went straight to the wooden chest, the one containing Leon's letters. She reread them, searching for any clue, any hint that might connect Leon to Mr. Abernathy. And then, she found it. In the last letter, the one where Leon wrote about his terrible mistake, he had mentioned a name. A name that had meant nothing to her before, but now, in the light of the espionage theory, resonated with significance. I have confided in someone here, Mother, he had written. A man named Silas. He seems trustworthy, but I fear I may have misjudged him. Pray for me, Mother. Pray that Silas is who he says he is.
Silas.
Who was Silas? And was it just a coincidence that Mr. Abernathy's first name was also Silas? It seemed unlikely. Too unlikely. Samantha felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the connection. Mr. Abernathy was Silas. The man Leon had trusted, the man he had feared he had misjudged. The groundskeeper wasn't just a keeper of graves, he was a keeper of secrets. A keeper of Leon Carter's secrets. And Samantha was about to confront him. The whispers had led her back to where she started. Back to Arlington. Chapter 6. A rose pressed in pages. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Arlington as Samantha made her way back to Mr. Abernathy's cottage. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint, sweet fragrance of late-blooming roses. She clutched the wooden chest containing Leon's letters tightly to her chest, its weight a physical manifestation of the burden. She carried the burden of uncovering the truth. She found Mr. Abernathy in his garden, tending to a patch of roses. He was pruning them with meticulous care, his weathered hands moving with a practiced grace that belied his age. He didn't seem surprised to see her, as if he had been expecting her return. Mr. Abernathy, Samantha said, her voice firm, despite the tremor of nervousness she felt. We need to talk. About Leon Carter. About Silas. He stopped pruning, his back to her. He remained silent for a long moment, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then he slowly turned, his pale blue eyes meeting hers. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stoic resignation. I told you, Mrs. Reed, he said, his voice a low rumble. Some things are best left undisturbed. I know you did, Samantha replied, but I can't. I won't. I need to know the truth. About Leon.
About what happened to him.
She held up the wooden chest. These letters, she said, his letters to his mother. He mentioned you. He called you Silas. He said he trusted you, and that he feared he had made a mistake. Mr. Abernathy's gaze shifted to the chest, his eyes lingering on the faded ribbons that tied the letters together. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. I knew this day would come, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I hoped it wouldn't, but I knew it would. He gestured to a small, wooden bench nestled beneath a rose arbor.
Sit down, Mrs. Reed, he said. It's a long story.
Samantha sat, placing the chest beside her. Mr. Abernathy sat opposite her, his hands clasped in his lap. He looked old, tired, the weight of years and secrets etched on his face. Leon was more than just a soldier, Mrs. Reed, he began, his voice gaining strength. He was recruited by a special unit, a clandestine operation tasked with gathering intelligence behind enemy lines. Samantha listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers in the tea room, the missing files, it was all coming together. I was his contact, Mr. Abernathy continued. His handler, you might say. I trained him, prepared him for his mission. He was a good lad, Leon. Brave, intelligent, dedicated. But he was also naive. He trusted too easily. He paused, his gaze drifting to the roses, his fingers absently touching a velvety petal. He was sent to France, he said, to infiltrate a German intelligence network. He was posing as a sympathizer, a disgruntled soldier, willing to betray his country. Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. This was even more dangerous than she had imagined. He was successful. At first, Mr. Abernathy continued. He gained their trust, gathered valuable information. But then something went wrong. He discovered something he shouldn't have. What? Samantha asked, her voice barely a whisper. What did he discover? Mr. Abernathy hesitated, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. He discovered that there was a traitor, he said. A high-ranking officer in the British Army. Someone who was selling secrets to the Germans. Someone who was responsible for the deaths of countless Allied soldiers. Samantha gasped. This was a betrayal of unimaginable proportions. And Leon, he confronted this traitor? She asked. Mr. Abernathy nodded. He did. He gathered evidence, proof of the betrayal. He was planning to expose him. But he was betrayed himself. By whom? Samantha pressed. Mr. Abernathy looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. By someone he trusted, he said. Someone within his own unit. Someone who was working for the traitor. He paused, taking a deep breath. They discovered his plan, he continued. They silenced him. They made it look like he had been killed by enemy fire. They buried the evidence, erased the records. They covered it all up. Samantha felt a surge of anger, of grief, of profound injustice. Leon, a brave young man, had been murdered, betrayed by his own side, to protect a traitor. And the traitor? She asked. What happened to him? Mr. Abernathy shook his head. He was never brought to justice, he said. He was too powerful, too well-connected. He remained in his position, continuing his treachery, until the end of the war. And then he simply disappeared. Samantha felt a sense of despair. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. But you knew all this? She asked. Why didn't you do anything? Mr. Abernathy looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. I tried, he said. I reported it to my superiors. But they dismissed it. They said it was too dangerous, too sensitive. They ordered me to drop it, to forget about it. He sighed. I was a soldier, Mrs. Reed, he said. I followed orders, even when those orders felt wrong. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dried rose. It was a deep red, almost black, its petals perfectly preserved. He handed it to Samantha. Leon gave me this, he said, the day before he left for France. He said it was a symbol of remembrance, of a love that would never die. Samantha took the rose, her fingers trembling. It was a tangible link to Leon, a reminder of his bravery, his sacrifice, his love for his mother. I kept it, Mr. Abernathy said, as a reminder of my failure, of my inability to protect him. He looked at the rose, a tear forming in his eye. Then he crumpled the rose in his hand, and the fragments fell, like drops of blood, to his feet. Samantha knew now that the story was far from over. The traitor had escaped justice. But the truth was still out there. And Samantha, armed with Leon's letters, Mr. Abernathy's confession, and a dried rose, was determined to find it. The pressed rose, a symbol of love and betrayal, was now the most precious item in her possession. It was a reminder of the terrible beauty of her quest. Chapter 7. The Cryptic Telegram. The dried rose, fragile yet potent with meaning, rested in Samantha's palm like a whispered secret. The conversation with Mr. Abernathy had been a revelation, a painful unveiling of a conspiracy that had cost Leon Carter his life and buried the truth in layers of official denial. But it had also provided a new, albeit dangerous, path forward. The unidentified traitor, the powerful, well-connected officer who had escaped justice, was now the focus of her investigation. Samantha returned to her quiet house, the setting sun casting long, melancholic shadows across the familiar rooms. The weight of the information she now possessed felt almost unbearable. She carefully placed the crushed rose fragments inside the wooden chest, next to Leon's letters, a tangible symbol of the betrayal and the enduring quest for justice. She knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help, someone with knowledge of the military hierarchy, someone who could navigate the complex world of wartime intelligence. But who could she trust? The very institutions that should have protected Leon had been complicit in his murder. Then she remembered a name mentioned in passing by Mr. Abernathy during his recounting of his attempts to report Leon's findings. He had said he'd contacted a Major Alistair Davies, a man in the War Office's intelligence division, someone he believed to be sympathetic, someone who might have been willing to listen. But the Major had dismissed the report, claiming lack of evidence and the sensitivity of the situation. Samantha felt a flicker of hope. Major Davies. Was he truly dismissive, or had he been pressured to silence Mr. Abernathy? Was he part of the cover-up, or a potential ally? She had to find out. She decided to start by searching for any records of Major Davies at the War Office. She knew it was a long shot, but she had to try. The next morning, she returned to the imposing building, feeling a renewed sense of determination. She bypassed the main reception area, heading instead to the records department, a vast, dimly lit room filled with rows upon rows of shelves stacked high with files and ledgers. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old paper. She approached a clerk, a young man with a bored expression and a slightly rumpled uniform. "I'm looking for information on a Major Alistair Davies," she said, her voice calm and steady. "He worked in the intelligence division during the war." The clerk sighed, as if the request was an unwelcome interruption to his day. He consulted a large index, his finger tracing the lines of names. "Davies, Alistair," he muttered. "Let me see." He flipped through several pages, then shook his head. "No record of him serving in the intelligence division," he said. "Are you sure you have the right name?" Samantha felt a wave of disappointment. Another dead end. But then, she remembered something. Mr. Abernathy had mentioned that Major Davies had been contacted by telegram. "Perhaps there's a record of a telegram," she suggested. "Sent to Major Davies, during the war. From Silas Abernathy." The clerk looked at her, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He consulted another index, this one specifically for telegrams. He flipped through the pages, his finger moving more slowly this time. And then he stopped. He looked up at Samantha, his expression slightly different now. "Yes," he said. "There is a record of a telegram. Sent to Major Alistair Davies, on October 10th, 1916. From A.S. Abernathy." Samantha's heart leaped with anticipation. This was it. This was the confirmation she had been seeking. "Can I see it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The clerk hesitated. "Those records are confidential, madam," he said. "Not available to the public." Samantha pulled out the photograph of Elsie Carter, the one she had shown the woman at the information desk. She held it out to the clerk. "Please," she said, her voice pleading. "This is about a soldier who was killed in the war. A soldier whose death was covered up. This telegram might be the key to uncovering the truth." The clerk looked at the photograph, his gaze lingering on Elsie's face. He seemed to waver, his initial reluctance giving way to a flicker of something. Perhaps sympathy, perhaps curiosity. "Wait here," he said, his voice softer than before. He disappeared into a back room, leaving Samantha alone with her hopes and fears. The minutes stretched into an eternity. She paced the small area, her gaze fixed on the closed door. Finally, the clerk returned. He held a small, yellowed piece of paper in his hand. It was a copy of the telegram. "This is all we have," he said, handing it to Samantha. "It's not very detailed. Mostly coded." Samantha took the telegram, her fingers trembling. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the faded words. It was, as the clerk had said, mostly coded, a series of numbers and abbreviations that meant nothing to her. But then, at the bottom, there was a short, uncoded message. Meeting requested.
Urgent.
Matter of utmost importance. Carter information compromised. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the proof that Mr. Abernathy had tried to warn Major Davies. That Leon's information had been compromised, that his life was in danger. But the telegram also raised a new question. Meeting requested. Had the meeting ever taken place? And, if so, what had happened? She looked up at the clerk. Is there any record of a response? She asked. To this telegram? The clerk shook his head. No, madam, he said. Nothing. Samantha felt a surge of frustration, but also a renewed sense of determination. The telegram was another piece of the puzzle, a crucial piece. It confirmed Mr. Abernathy's story, and it pointed directly to Major Alastair Davies. She had to find him. She had to find out what he knew. The cryptic telegram, with its coded message and urgent plea, was now her guiding star, leading her deeper into the labyrinth of wartime secrets. Chapter 8. Beneath the Weeping Willow. The telegram, with its stark message of urgency and compromised information, fueled Samantha's resolve. Finding Major Alastair Davies, retired or otherwise, became her paramount objective. She reasoned that if Davies had been in the War Office's intelligence division, there might be some record of his post-war life, perhaps an address, a pension record, anything that could lead her to him. She returned to her small house, the telegram safely tucked away with the other precious artifacts of her investigation. The quiet solitude, usually a comfort, now felt charged with a sense of anticipation. She needed a plan, a systematic approach to finding Major Davies. She decided to start with the most obvious source, the War Office itself. While the Records Department had yielded the telegram, they had been unable to provide any information on Davies's post-war life. She needed to find someone who might have known him personally, someone who might remember him, someone who could offer a clue to his whereabouts. The next day, she returned to the War Office, but this time, she avoided the official channels. She remembered the tea room across the street, the place where she had overheard the whispers about the spy ring. She decided to try her luck there again, hoping to glean some information from the conversations of the employees. The tea room was less crowded than before, the lunchtime rush having subsided. Samantha found a quiet corner table, ordered a cup of tea, and settled in to listen. The conversations were mostly mundane, office gossip and personal anecdotes. But then, she heard a name that made her ears prick up. Davies, a woman's voice said. Old Major Davies. Remember him? Vaguely, a man's voice replied. Quiet chap kept to himself. Something about intelligence, wasn't it? That's right, the woman said. He retired a few years ago. Heard he moved to the countryside. Somewhere near, I think it was Hampshire. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. Hampshire. A location. A starting point. She waited until the conversation had moved on, then discreetly approached the woman, who was now sitting alone, reading a newspaper. Excuse me, Samantha said, her voice polite but firm. I couldn't help but overhear you mentioning a Major Davies. I am trying to locate him. A family matter. The woman looked at her, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Alastair Davies? She asked. Tall, thin fellow? Always looked a bit haunted? Samantha nodded. That sounds like him, she said. He retired, the woman said. Moved to a small village. Near Winchester, I believe. Willow Creek. That's it. Willow Creek. Samantha felt a surge of excitement. Willow Creek. A specific village. A place she could actually go to. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. You've been very helpful. She left the tea room, her mind racing. Willow Creek. She needed to find a map, plan her journey, and prepare for her next encounter. The prospect of finally meeting Major Davies, the man who held the key to Leon Carter's secrets, filled her with both anticipation and trepidation. She found a map of Hampshire, located the village of Willow Creek, a small, seemingly insignificant on the sprawling landscape. It was a few hours' train journey from London. She decided to leave the next morning. That evening, she prepared for her trip, packing a small bag with essentials. She also took the wooden chest containing Leon's letters, the crushed rose, and the telegram. She felt a need to have these objects with her, a tangible connection to the young soldier whose memory she was determined to honor. As she lay in bed that night, sleep eluded her. Her mind was filled with images of Leon, of Mr. Abernathy, of the mysterious Major Davies. She imagined the village of Willow Creek, picturing a quiet, idyllic place, perhaps hiding secrets beneath its peaceful facade. The next morning, she took the train to Winchester, the nearest major town to Willow Creek. From there, she hired a car, a small, sturdy vehicle that seemed well suited for the country roads. The drive to Willow Creek was scenic, the rolling hills of Hampshire a soothing contrast to the bustling city she had left behind. She arrived in Willow Creek in the late afternoon. It was a small, picturesque village with a charming main street, a few shops, a pub, and a church with a towering spire. The houses were mostly old, built of stone, with thatched roofs and gardens filled with flowers. She stopped at the pub, the Willow Tree Inn, to ask for directions. The pub was cozy and welcoming, with a roaring fire in the hearth and the scent of ale and roasted meat in the air. She approached the barman, a friendly-looking man with a ruddy complexion. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for a Major Alistair Davies. I believe he lives in the village." The barman nodded. The Major," he said, "lives just outside the village, in the old mill house, by the creek." He gave her directions, pointing her towards a narrow lane that led out of the village, following the course of a small, meandering stream. Samantha thanked him and left the pub, her heart pounding with anticipation. She drove slowly down the lane, the creek gurgling beside her, the trees casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. And then she saw it, the old mill house, a large, stone building with a water wheel that was no longer turning. It was nestled beside the creek, surrounded by weeping willow trees, their branches drooping towards the water like mournful tears. She parked the car and approached the house, her footsteps echoing on the gravel path. The front door was old and weathered, with a brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head. She hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then, she raised the knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed through the quiet afternoon. She waited, her heart pounding in her chest. The fate of her entire quest, she felt, rested on what would happen in the next few minutes. The weeping willows seemed to watch her, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. Chapter 9. The Shell-Shocked Soldier. The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing a tall, thin figure silhouetted against the dim interior of the mill house. Major Alistair Davies, even after years of retirement, retained a military bearing, his posture erect despite a slight stoop to his shoulders. His hair, once likely dark, was now almost completely white, framing a face etched with deep lines, a roadmap of a life lived under the shadow of war. His eyes, though faded, held a sharpness, a glint of intelligence that belied his age. He peered at Samantha with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Mrs." he began, his voice a low rumble, tinged with a hint of an aristocratic accent. "Reed," Samantha supplied, her voice steady despite the tremor of nervousness she felt. "Samantha Reed. I believe you received a telegram some years ago. From a Mr. Silas Abernathy." Davies's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze intensifying. He studied her for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of deception. Then he sighed a weary sound. "Come in, Mrs. Reed," he said, stepping aside to allow her entry. The interior of the mill house was surprisingly cozy, despite its age and somewhat austere exterior. The main room was dominated by a large fireplace, where a fire crackled merrily, casting a warm glow on the worn furniture and the bookshelves that lined the walls. The air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and old books. Davies gestured to a pair of armchairs drawn up before the fire.
"Please sit down," he said.
Samantha sat, placing her handbag on the floor beside her. Davies sat opposite her, his hands clasped in his lap. He looked at her expectantly. "The telegram," Samantha began, "it mentioned a soldier." Leon Carter. And that his information was compromised. Davies nodded slowly. I remember the telegram, he said. It was unsettling. But Abernathy, he was a groundskeeper, wasn't he? Not exactly a reliable source. He was more than that, Samantha said, her voice firm. He was Leon Carter's contact. His handler. In a clandestine operation. To gather intelligence behind enemy lines. Davies's eyebrows rose slightly. You seem to know a great deal, Mrs. Reed, he said. Samantha pulled out the wooden chest, placing it on the small table between them. I do, she said. I've been investigating Leon Carter's death and the circumstances surrounding it. She opened the chest, revealing Leon's letters, the crushed rose, and the copy of the telegram. Davies looked at the contents of the chest, his expression unreadable. These letters, Samantha said, they were written by Leon Carter to his mother. He mentions a traitor, a high-ranking officer, selling secrets to the Germans. He says he was planning to expose him. Davies picked up one of the letters, his fingers tracing the faded ink. He read it silently, his expression growing increasingly somber. Abernathy contacted me, he said, his voice low, because he believed Carter was in danger. He believed that this traitor had discovered Carter's plan. He was right, Samantha said. Leon Carter was murdered, betrayed by someone within his own unit. To protect the traitor. Davies closed his eyes for a moment, as if in pain. I dismissed Abernathy's concerns, he said. I told him there was no evidence, that it was too sensitive a matter. I followed orders. Samantha looked at him, her eyes searching his. Did you believe him? She asked. Did you believe Abernathy? Davies hesitated. I don't know, he said. There were rumors, whispers of a leak, of a high-level betrayal, but nothing concrete, nothing that could be proven. But you did nothing? Samantha pressed. You didn't investigate? Davies shook his head. I was told to drop it, he said. By my superior. He said it was a wild goose chase, that it would damage morale, create unnecessary panic. And who was your superior? Samantha asked, her voice trembling slightly. Davies looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. General Sir Arthur Hawthorne, he said. Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. General Hawthorne. A name she had never heard before, but a name that now resonated with a chilling significance. A general. A high-ranking officer, indeed. The possible traitor. Hawthorne, she repeated, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. And what happened to him? Davies shrugged. He retired after the war, he said. With full honors. A celebrated hero. He died a few years ago. Of natural causes, I believe. Samantha felt a surge of frustration, of anger. The traitor, the man responsible for Leon Carter's death, had lived out his life in comfort and prestige, while Leon, a brave young man, had been murdered and forgotten. But there must be something, she said. Some record, some evidence, something that can prove his guilt. Davies looked at her, his expression bleak. The files, they were all destroyed, he said. After the war. A routine purge, they called it. But I suspect it was more than that. I suspect it was a deliberate attempt to erase any trace of the conspiracy. He paused, his gaze drifting to the fire. I've lived with this for years, Mrs. Reed, he said. The guilt, the doubt, the knowledge that I could have done more. That I should have done more. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. If you can find something, anything, he said. If you can bring this traitor to justice, even posthumously, it would bring some measure of peace. To me. And to the memory of Leon Carter. Samantha nodded, a newfound determination solidifying in her chest. I will try my very best, and will not give up until I find definitive answers. Davies seemed to relax, to take heart from her promise. But after Samantha left, she would find out he was not entirely truthful. The shell-shocked soldier still carried unseen scars and withheld secrets. Chapter 10. The hospital's secret ward. Samantha left the mill house with a heavy heart, but also with a renewed sense of purpose. Major Davies's confession, his admission of guilt, and his plea for justice had strengthened her resolve. The name General Sir Arthur Hawthorne, the suspected traitor, was now etched in her mind, a target for her investigation. But Davy's final words also lingered. He hadn't been entirely forthright. She drove back to London, the countryside blurring past her, her mind racing with possibilities. She needed to find proof, tangible evidence that could link Hawthorne to the betrayal. Davies had said the files were destroyed, but she refused to believe that everything had been erased. There had to be something somewhere. She decided to focus on Hawthorne himself. She needed to learn everything she could about him, his career, his connections, his personal life. She started with the public records, searching for any information on his military service, his family, his social circle. She spent days in libraries and archives, poring over old newspapers, military records, and biographical dictionaries. She discovered that Hawthorne had been a decorated officer, a hero of several campaigns, a man widely respected and admired. He had come from a wealthy, influential family, with connections to the highest echelons of British society. He had been married to a woman named Eleanor and had one daughter, a woman named Beatrice. But there was nothing in the public record that suggested any hint of treachery. He was portrayed as a paragon of virtue, a model soldier, a devoted husband and father. Samantha felt a growing sense of frustration. Was she chasing a ghost? Was Hawthorne truly innocent and Leon Carter's suspicions misplaced? Then she remembered something. During her research, she had come across a brief mention of Hawthorne's wife, Eleanor, being involved in charity work. Specifically, she had volunteered at a military hospital, a hospital for shell-shocked soldiers. A hospital called St. Jude's. Samantha felt a flicker of intuition. Shell-shocked soldiers. Men who had seen the horrors of war, men whose minds had been shattered by the trauma. Men who might have witnessed things, heard things, that others had not. She decided to investigate St. Jude's. It was a long shot, but it was something. A thread to pull, a path to follow. She found that St. Jude's was still in operation, although it had been converted into a general psychiatric hospital. She contacted the hospital administrator, requesting permission to access their archives, claiming to be researching the history of wartime medical care. Her request was initially denied. The hospital records were confidential, they said, not available to the public. But Samantha persisted, using all her charm and persuasive skills, emphasizing the importance of her research, the need to honor the sacrifices of the soldiers. Finally, after weeks of persistence, she received permission. Limited permission to access only non-confidential records, records related to the hospital's administration, its funding, its charitable activities. But it was enough. She traveled to St. Jude's, a large, imposing building on the outskirts of London. The atmosphere was somber, the air filled with a sense of quiet melancholy. She was shown to the archives, a dusty, dimly lit room filled with rows upon rows of shelves stacked high with files and ledgers. She began her search, poring over the old records, searching for any mention of Eleanor Hawthorne, any connection to General Hawthorne, any hint of anything unusual. She found records of Eleanor's volunteer work, her donations to the hospital, her attendance at fundraising events. She found letters of thanks from grateful patients, praising her kindness and compassion. But then, she found something else. Something that made her heart skip a beat. A file, labeled Special Ward. A file that was marked confidential. Restricted access. Samantha felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was something hidden, something secret. Something that the hospital authorities had not wanted her to see. She discreetly examined the file. It contained records of a small, isolated ward within the hospital. A ward for special cases. Patients who were deemed too sensitive, too dangerous, to be housed with the general population. She found a list of patients admitted to the special ward during the war. And there, among the names, she saw one that made her breath catch in her throat. Private Thomas Baker. Thomas Baker. It was a common enough name, but the date next to the listing stopped her cold. It was a week after Leon Carter's official death date. She scanned down the list. Another name, scribbled in, caught her eye. Unknown. Referred by General A. Hawthorne. Samantha's hands trembled. This was it. This was the connection. Hawthorne had referred a patient to the special ward, a patient whose identity was unknown. Could this be related to Leon Carter? To the cover-up? Why would a general be personally referring a patient to a psychiatric ward? And a secret ward at that? The patient had to be linked to the betrayal. She knew she couldn't take the file. It was too risky. But she carefully copied down the information, the names, the dates, the referral by Hawthorne. She left St. Jude's, her mind racing. The special ward, the unknown patient, Hawthorne's involvement, it all pointed to something sinister, something hidden beneath the surface of the official narrative. The hospital, a place of healing, held a dark secret. And Samantha was one step closer to uncovering it. But she also knew, instinctively, that the unknown patient was the key. Chapter 11. A Dance of Shadows. The discovery of the special ward at St. Jude's and the unknown patient referred by General Hawthorne had ignited a new fire in Samantha's investigation. The secrecy surrounding the ward, the anonymity of the patient, and Hawthorne's direct involvement all pointed to a deliberate attempt to conceal something or someone connected to Leon Carter's death and the larger betrayal. Samantha knew her next step was crucial. She needed to find out more about this unknown patient. Who were they? Why were they hidden away in a secret ward? And most importantly, what connection did they have to Hawthorne and Leon Carter? She considered returning to St. Jude's, but she knew that was too risky. She had already pushed her luck gaining access to the archives, and any further inquiries would undoubtedly raise suspicion. She needed a different approach, a way to gather information without attracting attention. Then, she remembered Beatrice Hawthorne, General Hawthorne's daughter. She had discovered her name during her research into the general's family. Beatrice, according to the records, was still alive, living in London. Perhaps she knew something. Perhaps she could shed some light on her father's activities, his connections to St. Jude's, and the mysterious, unknown patient. Samantha knew that approaching Beatrice would be delicate. She couldn't simply confront her with accusations about her father. She needed to be subtle, to gain her trust, to encourage her to talk without revealing her true intentions. She decided to use a pretext. She would pose as a researcher, writing a biography of Eleanor Hawthorne, the general's late wife. She would focus on Eleanor's charity work, her involvement with St. Jude's, and use that as a way to gradually introduce questions about the general and the special ward. She found Beatrice Hawthorne's address, a large, elegant house in a fashionable part of London. She sent a letter, carefully crafted, requesting an interview, emphasizing her interest in Eleanor's philanthropic work and her admiration for the Hawthorne family. To her surprise, Beatrice agreed to meet. A week later, Samantha found herself sitting in the opulent drawing room of the Hawthorne residence, facing a woman who bore a striking resemblance to her late mother. Beatrice was in her late 60s, elegant and refined, with a sharp intelligence in her eyes. "Mrs. Reed," Beatrice said, her voice polite but somewhat reserved. "You're writing a biography of my mother?" "Yes," Samantha replied, maintaining her composure. "She was a remarkable woman, your mother. Her dedication to St. Jude's, her compassion for the soldiers, it's truly inspiring." Beatrice smiled faintly. "She was a saint, my mother," she said. "She devoted her life to helping others." Samantha steered the conversation towards St. Jude's, asking about Eleanor's experiences there, the patients she had helped, the challenges she had faced. Beatrice spoke warmly of her mother's work, her dedication to the hospital, her unwavering support for the shell-shocked soldiers. Then, Samantha carefully introduced the topic of the special ward. "I came across a reference," she said, to a special ward at St. Jude's. A ward for particularly difficult cases. Beatrice's expression changed slightly, a flicker of something in her eyes. Perhaps unease, perhaps apprehension. "Yes," she said, her voice a little quieter. "There was a special ward for patients who were too disturbed to be with the others." "Do you remember anything about it?" Samantha asked, her voice gentle and encouraging. "Any specific patients? Any unusual cases?" Beatrice hesitated. "It was a long time ago," she said. "I was just a girl. My mother, she didn't talk much about it. It was upsetting for her." Samantha sensed that Beatrice was holding something back. She decided to press a little further.
I understand, she said.
But I also came across a record of a patient, an unknown patient, referred to the special ward by your father. Beatrice's eyes widened slightly. She looked at Samantha, her expression a mixture of surprise and fear. My father?
She said.
I don't know anything about that. But Samantha could see the lie in her eyes. She knew.
She knew something.
Beatrice, Samantha said, her voice soft but firm. I know this is difficult, but I believe this unknown patient is connected to something very important. Something that happened during the war. Something that involves your father. Beatrice looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. She was clearly struggling with something, torn between loyalty to her father and something else. I can't, she whispered. I can't talk about it. Samantha reached out, gently placing her hand on Beatrice's arm.
Please, she said.
Whatever you know, it could help me. It could help bring justice to someone who was wronged. Someone who was betrayed. Beatrice looked at her, tears welling up in her eyes. The carefully constructed facade of composure was crumbling, revealing the turmoil beneath. The dance of shadows was coming to an end. The truth, Samantha felt, was close. And it was going to be painful. Chapter 12. The Midnight Confession. Beatrice Hawthorne's carefully constructed composure shattered, tears streaming down her face as the weight of long-held secrets became too much to bear. Samantha watched her, a mixture of pity and anticipation swirling within her. The elegant drawing room, with its opulent furnishings and portraits of stern-faced ancestors, felt like a stage for a long-overdue reckoning. It was horrible, Beatrice whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Something I've tried to forget for years. Samantha waited patiently, allowing Beatrice to find her own way to the truth. The silence stretched, punctuated only by Beatrice's sobs and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Finally, Beatrice took a deep breath, composing herself with a visible effort. The unknown patient, she began, her voice still trembling. He was a soldier. A young soldier. He had seen things. Terrible things. Samantha nodded, encouraging her to continue. My father, he brought him to St. Jude's, Beatrice said. He said the soldier was a threat to national security, that he knew secrets. Secrets that couldn't be revealed. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. This was the confirmation she had been seeking. The soldier, he wasn't insane, was he? Samantha asked, her voice soft. Beatrice shook her head vehemently.
No, she said.
He wasn't insane. He was terrified. He was broken. But he wasn't insane. What was his name, Beatrice? Samantha asked gently. Do you remember his name? Beatrice hesitated. I overheard my father talking, she said. On the phone. One night. He mentioned a name. Carter. Leon Carter. Samantha felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Confirmation. The unknown patient was Leon Carter. He hadn't been killed in action, as the official records claimed. He had been captured, silenced, hidden away in a secret ward to protect the traitor, General Hawthorne.
But why?
Samantha asked. Why did your father do this? What secrets did Leon Carter know? Beatrice looked at her, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. He knew about my father, she said. He knew that my father was working for the Germans. That he was betraying his country. Samantha gasped. The truth, finally revealed, was even more shocking than she had imagined. My father, he was a gambler, Beatrice continued, her voice barely a whisper. He had debts. Huge debts. The Germans, they offered him money to pay off his debts. In exchange for information. Samantha felt a surge of anger, of disgust. General Hawthorne, a celebrated hero, had betrayed his country, his soldiers, for money. To cover his gambling debts. Leon Carter, he found out, Beatrice said. He gathered evidence. He was going to expose him. But my father, he found out first. He had him silenced. And your mother? Samantha asked. Did she know? Beatrice shook her head. No, she said. She didn't know. She would never have condoned it. She was a good woman. A kind woman. But you knew, Samantha said. Beatrice nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "I suspected," she said. "I overheard things. I saw things. But I was afraid. Afraid of my father. Afraid of what he would do." "And after the war?" Samantha asked. "What happened to Leon Carter?" Beatrice looked away, her body trembling. I don't know," she said. "My father, he arranged for him to be transferred to another hospital, somewhere remote. I never saw him again." Samantha felt a profound sense of sadness, of loss. Leon Carter, a brave young man, had been sacrificed to protect a traitor. His life, his future, stolen from him. "Beatrice," Samantha said, her voice firm. "You need to tell me everything. Everything you know. About your father. About the transfer. About everything." Beatrice looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. The burden of the secret, carried for so many years, was finally being lifted. I will," she said. "I will tell you everything." And she did. That night, in the opulent drawing room of the Hawthorne residence, Beatrice Hawthorne confessed everything. She told Samantha about her father's gambling debts, his contacts with the Germans, his manipulation of the military intelligence system. She told her about the secret meetings, the coded messages, the flow of information that had cost countless Allied lives. She also told her about the transfer of Leon Carter. She didn't know the exact location, but she remembered a name. A doctor. A Dr. Alistair Croft. A doctor who specialized in discrete cases. A doctor who had connections to private institutions. Samantha listened intently, taking notes, recording every detail. The midnight confession was a torrent of information, a flood of long-suppressed secrets. It was the key, the final key, to unlocking the mystery of Leon Carter's fate and exposing the treachery of General Sir Arthur Hawthorne. The truth, painful and devastating, was finally out in the open. But the journey wasn't over. Samantha still had one more lead to follow. Dr. Alistair Croft. The doctor who held the final piece of the puzzle. Chapter 13. The Price of Loyalty. Beatrice Hawthorne's confession had been a watershed moment, a torrent of truth that had washed away years of lies and deception. But it had also left Samantha with a new challenge, finding Dr. Alistair Croft, the man who held the key to Leon Carter's ultimate fate. Beatrice had remembered the name, a name associated with discrete cases and private institutions, a name that whispered of hidden agendas and shadowy dealings. Samantha began her search for Dr. Croft with the usual resources: medical directories, professional registers, hospital records. But the name yielded nothing. It was as if Dr. Croft had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace of his existence. She considered contacting the authorities, reporting Beatrice's confession, and requesting an official investigation. But she hesitated. The institutions that should have protected Leon Carter had been complicit in his betrayal. Could she trust them now? Would they pursue the truth, or would they bury it again, to protect the reputation of a decorated general and the integrity of the establishment? She decided to try a different approach. She remembered Mr. Abernathy, the silent groundskeeper, Leon Carter's former handler. He had been part of a clandestine operation, a world of secrets and hidden networks. Perhaps he had contacts, connections that could help her find Dr. Croft. She returned to Arlington, to the small cottage nestled amidst the graves, the scent of wood smoke and roses still clinging to the air. Mr. Abernathy seemed unsurprised to see her, as if he had been expecting her return. "Mr. Abernathy," Samantha said, her voice firm. "I need your help. I know the truth. About Leon Carter. About General Hawthorne. About the betrayal." Mr. Abernathy looked at her, his pale blue eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else. Perhaps resignation, perhaps a flicker of hope. "I told you, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Some things are best left undisturbed."
"But they can't be," Samantha said.
"Not anymore. Leon Carter deserves justice. And the truth needs to be known." She told him about Beatrice Hawthorne's confession, about the unknown patient at St. Jude's, about the transfer arranged by General Hawthorne, and about Dr. Alistair Croft. Mr. Abernathy listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she had finished, he remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond her shoulder.
Croft, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. I've heard that name.
In certain circles. He's a facilitator. A man who makes things disappear. People documents evidence. Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. This was even more sinister than she had imagined. Do you know how to find him?
She asked.
Mr. Abernathy hesitated. I have contacts, he said. People who owe me favors. People who operate outside the usual channels. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. But be warned, Mrs. Reed, he said. This is dangerous. Croft, he's not a man to be trifled with. He has connections. Powerful connections. Samantha nodded. I understand, she said. But I'm not afraid. I need to find him. I need to know what happened to Leon Carter. Mr. Abernathy sighed. Very well, he said. I will make inquiries. It may take some time. And it may come at a price. I'm prepared to pay it, Samantha said, her voice unwavering. The price of loyalty, she knew, could be high. But the price of silence, of inaction, was even higher. Mr. Abernathy gave her a cryptic instruction. Wait for a message. At the usual place. A white rose. If it's tied with a black ribbon, it means I have information. The usual place, Samantha knew, was Leon Carter's bench, the place where the unseen footprints had first drawn her into this mystery. She returned to her quiet house, feeling a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She had set in motion a chain of events that could have far-reaching consequences. She was venturing into a world of shadows and secrets, a world where the truth was a dangerous commodity. Days turned into weeks. Samantha waited, her life a tense vigil. She visited Leon Carter's bench every morning, searching for the white rose, the signal from Mr. Abernathy. The waiting was agonizing, the silence filled with unspoken fears. Then one morning it was there, a single, white rose, lying on the stone bench, and tied around its stem a black ribbon. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest. She carefully picked up the rose, her fingers trembling. The message was clear. Mr. Abernathy had information. Attached to the ribbon was a small, folded piece of paper. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the hastily scrawled words.
Croft. Coastal Retreat.
Near Dover. White Cliffs Sanatorium. The note gave no further details. Samantha felt a surge of adrenaline. White Cliffs Sanatorium. Near Dover. It was a location, a destination. The final piece of the puzzle. The place where Leon Carter had been sent. The place where Dr. Alistair Croft, the facilitator, plied his trade. She knew what she had to do. She had to go to Dover. She had to confront Dr. Croft. She had to find out the truth about Leon Carter's fate. The price of loyalty had led her to this point, and she was prepared to pay whatever further price was required to uncover the final, hidden secret. The white rose, a symbol of hope and remembrance, was now also a symbol of danger. Chapter 14. Across the divided line. The journey to Dover felt like a descent into the heart of the mystery, the white cliffs looming large against the gray sky, a stark and imposing backdrop to Samantha's final confrontation. The White Cliff Sanatorium, according to Mr. Abernathy's cryptic message, was her destination. These objects were her talismans, reminders of the long and arduous journey that had brought her to this point. She arrived in Dover in the late afternoon, the salty tang of the sea air filling her lungs. The town was bustling with activity, a mix of locals and tourists, oblivious to the dark secrets hidden within the imposing cliffs that towered above them. She hired a car, a small, nondescript vehicle, and followed the directions she had found on a map, driving along a winding coastal road that offered breathtaking views of the English Channel. The sanatorium, she knew, was located in a secluded spot, away from the prying eyes of the town. After a while, after she thought she might be lost, she saw it. The White Cliffs Sanatorium, a large, imposing building, perched precariously on the edge of the cliffs, its gray stone walls blending seamlessly with the rugged landscape. It looked more like a fortress than a place of healing, its windows like watchful eyes staring out at the sea. Samantha parked the car a distance away, her heart pounding in her chest. She approached the sanatorium on foot, her footsteps echoing on the gravel path. The entrance was grand, with heavy oak doors and a brass plaque that proclaimed its name in elegant lettering. She hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was it. The final confrontation. The moment of truth. She pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The interior was surprisingly opulent, with plush carpets, ornate chandeliers, and oil paintings adorning the walls. It felt more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. A receptionist, a young woman with a carefully neutral expression, looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but devoiding warmth. "I'm here to see Dr. Croft," Samantha said, her voice firm. "Dr. Alistair Croft." The receptionist's expression changed slightly, a flicker of something in her eyes. Perhaps surprise, perhaps apprehension. "Dr. Croft is not available," she said. He doesn't see visitors." "I believe he will see me," Samantha said, her gaze unwavering. "Tell him it's about Leon Carter." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. She hesitated, then picked up the telephone, speaking in a low voice. Samantha waited, her anxiety growing with each passing moment. Finally, the receptionist put down the phone. "Dr. Croft will see you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Follow me." Samantha followed the receptionist down a long corridor, the silence broken only by the muffled sounds of footsteps and the distant crashing of waves against the cliffs. The atmosphere was heavy, oppressive, as if the very walls were steeped in secrets. They reached a door at the end of the corridor. The receptionist knocked softly, then opened the door and gestured for Samantha to enter. Samantha stepped inside. The room was large and lavishly furnished, with a large desk, leather armchairs, and a panoramic view of the sea through a large window. Behind the desk sat a man, his back to her, gazing out at the turbulent waters. "Dr. Croft?" Samantha said, her voice trembling slightly. The man turned. He was older than she had expected, his hair completely white, his face deeply lined, his eyes a piercing blue. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice smooth, cultured, with a hint of something sinister. "I've been expecting you." Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. This was the man, the facilitator, the man who held the key to Leon Carter's fate. "You know why I'm here," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. Croft nodded slowly. "I do," he said. "You're here about the soldier, Leon Carter. What happened to him, Dr. Croft?" Samantha asked, her voice unwavering. "What did you do to him?" Croft smiled, a cold, humorless smile. "I did what was necessary," he said. "What was required?" "He was a brave young man," Samantha said. "He was betrayed. By his own country. By General Hawthorne." Croft's smile vanished. "Hawthorne," he said, his voice a low growl. "A fool. A greedy, ambitious fool. And you helped him," Samantha said. "You silenced Leon Carter. You made him disappear." Croft leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Samantha. "He knew too much," he said. "He was a threat. To national security. To certain individuals. He was a threat to Hawthorne's career," Samantha said. "To his reputation. To his freedom." Croft shrugged. "The price of loyalty," he said. "Sometimes sacrifices must be made. For the greater good." "There is no greater good," Samantha said, her voice rising. "That justifies betraying your country. That justifies murdering a brave young man." Croft looked at her, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of contempt and something else. "Perhaps respect?" "You're persistent, Mrs. Reed," he said. "I'll give you that. But you're also naive. You don't understand the way the world works. The compromises that must be made. The lines that must be crossed." "I understand that Leon Carter deserved better," Samantha said. "He deserved justice. And I intend to see that he gets it." She faced a divided line. Croft was not going to surrender information willingly. He was a professional accustomed to keeping secrets, even when the man he'd served was dead. The sanatorium, she knew, was not going to yield any easy answers. But, at the same time, his carefully phrased statements were revealing as much as they were hiding. Chapter 15. The Unsent Letter. Samantha stood firm, her gaze locked with Dr. Croft's. The opulent office, with its panoramic view of the turbulent sea, felt like a battleground, a place where the truth was a weapon to be wielded, a prize to be won. Croft, the facilitator, the man who made problems disappear, was not going to yield his secrets easily. He was a professional, accustomed to operating in the shadows, to manipulating the truth, to protecting his clients and himself. "You won't find what you're looking for, Mrs. Reed," Croft said, his voice smooth, confident. "Leon Carter is gone. There is no trace. No evidence." "There's always evidence, Dr. Croft," Samantha replied, her voice unwavering. "Somewhere. Something. Someone always knows." She pulled out the wooden chest, placing it on the desk between them. "These letters," she said, "they were written by Leon Carter. To his mother. He mentions a traitor. A high-ranking officer. Selling secrets to the Germans." Croft glanced at the chest, his expression dismissive. "Letters," he said. "Written by a disturbed young man. Under the stress of war. Hardly reliable evidence." "And what about Beatrice Hawthorne's confession?" Samantha countered, pulling out the written statement. "The daughter of General Hawthorne. She confirms everything. She admits her father's treachery, his gambling debts, his contacts with the Germans." Croft's eyes flickered for a moment, a hint of unease in his gaze. But he quickly recovered his composure. "A daughter's delusion," he said. "Grief-stricken. Seeking to tarnish her father's memory. A sad, but not uncommon, phenomenon." Samantha knew she was facing a formidable opponent. Croft was a master of manipulation, of twisting the truth, of dismissing any evidence that threatened him. She needed something more, something concrete, something irrefutable. Then she remembered something. Something Beatrice Hawthorne had mentioned during her midnight confession. She had said that Leon Carter had gathered evidence, proof of her father's betrayal. He had been planning to expose him, but he had been silenced before he could. "Leon Carter had proof, Dr. Croft," Samantha said. "Documents. Photographs. Something. What happened to it? Where did you hide it?" Croft's expression remained unchanged. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said. But Samantha could sense a shift, a subtle change in his demeanor. He was no longer quite so confident, quite so dismissive. He knew what she was talking about. "You transferred Leon Carter," Samantha continued, "from St. Jude's to this place. You kept him here, under your care. You silenced him. But you didn't destroy the evidence, did you? You kept it as insurance, in case you ever needed it." Croft remained silent, his gaze fixed on Samantha. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations, with the weight of hidden truths. Finally, Croft sighed, a weary sound. "You're relentless, Mrs. Reed," he said. "I'll give you that." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the window, to the turbulent sea beyond. "Leon Carter," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "He was a remarkable young man. Brave. Intelligent. Determined. He reminded me of myself. When I was younger. Before I became this." He looked back at Samantha, his eyes filled with a deep sadness, a profound regret. "He was a threat," he said. "Not to national security, but to powerful people. People who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. And you were their instrument," Samantha said. Croft nodded slowly. He said. "I made a choice. A long time ago. A choice that cost me my soul." He paused, then reached into a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. He placed it on the desk, in front of Samantha. "This," he said, "was Leon Carter's. He kept it with him. Always. It was his diary, his journal, his confession." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the proof. The evidence she had been seeking. She carefully picked up the book, her fingers trembling. It was old and worn, the leather cracked and faded. She opened it, her eyes scanning the neatly written pages. It was, as Croft had said, a diary. A record of Leon Carter's experiences during the war. His observations, his suspicions, his discoveries. His growing awareness of the betrayal, his determination to expose the traitor. And then, she found it. A section, near the end of the diary, where Leon had documented everything. The names, the dates, the places, the coded messages. The evidence of General Hawthorne's treachery. But there was something else, too. Something unexpected. A letter, tucked inside the back cover of the diary. An unsent letter, addressed to Samantha's son, Thomas. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. Her son, Thomas. The connection, the final, heartbreaking connection between Leon Carter and her own life. She carefully unfolded the letter, her hands trembling. It was written in Leon's neat, precise hand. The words, filled with a poignant mixture of love, loss, and a desperate plea for understanding, reached across the years, bridging the gap between the living and the dead. The unsent letter was the most powerful evidence of all. It was proof of a life cut short, of a love unfulfilled, of a truth that had finally been revealed. Chapter 16. Scars of the Somme. The unsent letter, tucked within the pages of Leon Carter's diary, was a ghost made tangible, a voice from beyond the grave reaching out to Samantha's long-lost son, Thomas. The words, penned in the midst of the brutal chaos of the Somme, were a testament to Leon's courage, his loyalty, and his heartbreaking awareness of his impending fate. Samantha read, her tears blurring the ink, each sentence a fresh wound reopening the old scars of her own loss. My dearest Thomas, if you are reading this, then I fear I have not returned. The shadows grow long here, and the air is thick with the stench of death and deceit. I write this not as a farewell, but as a confession, a burden I can no longer carry alone. You know of my assignment, of the intelligence I have been gathering. But what you do not know, what I have kept hidden even from you, my closest friend, is the true nature of the treachery I have uncovered. It reaches far higher, far deeper than I ever imagined. It touches those we have been taught to trust, those who command our loyalty, those who hold our lives in their hands. I have discovered that General Sir Arthur Hawthorne, a man celebrated as a hero, is in fact a traitor. He has been selling secrets to the enemy, betraying our soldiers, sacrificing our lives for his own personal gain. I have gathered evidence, proof of his treachery, but I fear I may not live to see it delivered. I have been betrayed, Thomas, by someone within my own unit, someone I trusted. Someone who is working for Hawthorne. I know that this will be difficult for you to believe, to accept. Hawthorne is a powerful man, a respected man. But I swear to you, Thomas, on the bond of friendship we share, on the memory of all those we have lost, that this is the truth. And it must be known. If I do not survive, I entrust this task to you. You must find a way to expose Hawthorne, to bring him to justice. You must ensure that his treachery does not go unpunished, that the sacrifices we have made, the lives that have been lost, are not in vain. I know this is a heavy burden, Thomas, a dangerous task, but I know you. I know your courage, your integrity, your unwavering sense of justice. You are the only one I can trust, the only one who can carry this forward. Remember me, Thomas. Remember us. Remember the Somme. Remember the fallen. And never forget the price of loyalty, the cost of betrayal. Your friend, always. Leon. Samantha closed the letter, her hands trembling, her heart aching with a grief that was both old and new. Leon's words, written so long ago, resonated with a power that transcended time and death. They were a testament to his courage, his integrity, and his unwavering belief in justice. But they also revealed a painful truth. Thomas, her son, had never received this letter. He had never known about Leon's discovery, about Hawthorne's treachery, about the burden that Leon had entrusted to him. He had died, believing in the cause, believing in the leaders, unaware of the betrayal that had cost so many lives, including his own. Samantha felt a surge of anger, of outrage, at the injustice of it all. Hawthorne had not only betrayed his country, he had stolen the lives of countless young men, including Leon and Thomas, and he had escaped justice, living out his life in comfort and prestige. She looked at Dr. Croft, who had been watching her silently, his expression a mixture of sadness and resignation. "You knew," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion. "You knew about this letter. You knew about the evidence. You kept it all these years." Croft nodded slowly.
"I did," he said.
"I was bound. By my profession. By my obligations."
"But you're not bound anymore, are you?"
Samantha said.
"Hawthorne is dead.
The war is over. You can release it. You can help me expose him." Croft hesitated.
"It's dangerous," he said.
"Even now. Hawthorne's allies, they still have power. They still have influence. But you have the evidence," Samantha said. "Leon Carter's diary. The unsent letter. Beatrice Hawthorne's confession. It's enough. It's enough to bring him down. Even in death." Croft looked at her, his eyes searching hers. He saw the determination, the unwavering resolve, the grief-stricken mother seeking justice for her son and his friend. He sighed. "Very well," he said. "I will help you. I will release the evidence. I will tell everything I know." He paused, then looked out the window, at the turbulent sea. "It's time," he said. "Time for the truth to be known. Time for the scars of the psalm to finally heal." He turned back to Samantha, a faint smile on his lips. "But we must be careful," he said. "We must be strategic. We need a plan. A way to expose Hawthorne without endangering ourselves." Samantha nodded. She was ready. She had come this far. She had faced the darkness, the secrets, the betrayals. She had found the truth. And now, with Dr. Croft's help, she would bring that truth to light. The scars of the psalm, the wounds inflicted by Hawthorne's treachery, would finally be exposed. And the ghosts of Leon Carter and Thomas Reed, and countless others, would finally find peace. The unsent letter had become a message of hope. Chapter 17. The Reunion at Dawn. Dr. Croft's decision to cooperate marked a turning point, a shift from concealment to revelation. The facilitator, the man who had once buried secrets, was now ready to unearth them, to expose the treachery of General Hawthorne and bring justice to Leon Carter. But he also understood the risks. Hawthorne's allies, though diminished in number, still held positions of influence, and exposing a celebrated war hero, even posthumously, would be a delicate and potentially dangerous operation. "We need a plan," Croft said, his voice low, his eyes sharp and focused. "A way to present the evidence that is irrefutable, that cannot be dismissed or suppressed." Samantha nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. She had the evidence. Leon's diary, the unsent letter, Beatrice Hawthorne's confession, and now, Dr. Croft's testimony. But she needed a platform, a way to bring this evidence to the public, to the authorities, in a manner that would ensure it was taken seriously. The newspapers, Samantha suggested. A reputable newspaper, with investigative journalists. They could publish the story. Expose Hawthorne's treachery. Force an official inquiry. Croft considered this, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's risky," he said. "The newspapers, they can be manipulated. They can be pressured. They can be silenced. But some are more independent than others," Samantha countered. "Some have a reputation for uncovering the truth, for challenging the establishment." She remembered a newspaper, the London Chronicle, known for its investigative journalism, its willingness to tackle controversial subjects, its commitment to holding power accountable. "The London Chronicle," she said. "They might be willing to take it on. They have a track record." Croft nodded slowly. "The Chronicle," he repeated. "Yes, they might be our best option. But we need to approach them carefully. We need to present them with a compelling case. A case they cannot refuse." They spent the next few hours, crafting a strategy, meticulously planning their approach to the London Chronicle. They decided to focus on the human element, on the tragic story of Leon Carter, the brave young soldier betrayed by his own country. They would use the unsent letter to Thomas as the centerpiece of the narrative, a poignant testament to Leon's courage and his unwavering belief in justice. They would also present Beatrice Hawthorne's confession, a damning indictment of her father's treachery, and Dr. Croft's testimony, the inside account of the cover-up, the silencing of Leon Carter. They agreed that Samantha would be the primary contact with the newspaper, presenting herself as the grieving friend of Leon's mother, seeking justice for a forgotten soldier. Croft would remain in the background, providing support and guidance, but avoiding direct involvement, at least initially. With a plan in place, Samantha felt a renewed sense of hope, a surge of determination. She was ready to take the next step, to bring the truth to light, to expose Hawthorne's treachery, and finally bring peace to the ghosts of Leon Carter and her son, Thomas. The next morning, Samantha returned to London, leaving Croft behind at the White Cliff Sanatorium, a silent sentinel guarding the remaining secrets. She went directly to the offices of the London Chronicle, a bustling hub of activity, filled with the clatter of typewriters and the murmur of voices. She requested a meeting with the editor-in-chief, a man named Mr. Arthur Davies, no relation to the Major, known for his sharp intellect and his unwavering commitment to journalistic integrity. She was ushered into his office, a large, cluttered space filled with books, newspapers, and the palpable energy of a man dedicated to uncovering the truth. Samantha presented her case, carefully laying out the evidence, the story of Leon Carter, the betrayal of General Hawthorne, the cover-up orchestrated by Dr. Croft. She showed him Leon's diary, the unsent letter, Beatrice Hawthorne's confession. Mr. Davies listened intently, his eyes sharp and focused, his expression unreadable. When she had finished, he remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the documents spread out before him. "This is a remarkable story, Mrs. Reed," he said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. "And a deeply disturbing one. If it's true, it would shake the foundations of everything we believe about the war, about our heroes." "It is true, Mr. Davies," Samantha said, her voice unwavering. "I swear to you, it is true." Mr. Davies nodded slowly. "I believe you, Mrs. Reed," he said. "But belief is not enough. We need proof. Irrefutable proof." "We have proof," Samantha said. "The diary, the letter, the confession, and Dr. Croft. He's willing to testify, to confirm everything." Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on Samantha. "This is a dangerous undertaking, Mrs. Reed," he said. "Hawthorne's allies, they still have power. They will fight back. They will try to discredit you, to silence you." "I'm not afraid, Mr. Davies," Samantha said. "I've come this far. I won't be silenced. I owe it to Leon Carter, to my son, to all those who were betrayed." Mr. Davies smiled, a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Very well, Mrs. Reed," he said. "The London Chronicle will take the case. We will investigate. We will uncover the truth. And we will publish it." Samantha felt a surge of relief, of gratitude, of vindication. The battle was far from over, but she had won a crucial victory. The truth, long buried, was finally going to see the light of day. As she left the offices of the London Chronicle, feeling the weight of the task ahead but with her resolve even stronger, Samantha unexpectedly encountered someone at the door. It was Major Alistair Davies, looking significantly less shell-shocked and far more alert than he had when she'd met him at his home. It seemed there was another layer to the story, another connection to be made. At dawn the next day, he handed her a note. It said simply, "Arlington. Leon's bench. Dawn." Chapter 18. The Betrayal Unveiled. The unexpected encounter with Major Alistair Davies at the London Chronicle offices had been a jarring revelation, a twist in the narrative that Samantha had not anticipated. His note, cryptic and urgent: "Arlington. Leon's bench. Dawn," suggested a hidden layer to the story, a secret that Davies was finally ready to reveal. The dawn was cold and crisp, the sky painted in hues of gray and pale pink as Samantha made her way to Leon Carter's bench in Arlington National Cemetery. The dew clung to the grass, heavy and glistening, reminiscent of the morning when she had first discovered the unseen footprints, the first clue that had drawn her into this labyrinthine mystery. She saw him waiting, standing by the bench, his figure tall and erect, his posture no longer stooped, his eyes no longer haunted. Major Alistair Davies, the man she had believed to be a broken, shell-shocked soldier, was now revealed as someone far more complex. Major Davies, Samantha said, her voice questioning, her eyes searching his. What is this about? Why are you here? Davies looked at her, his expression serious, his gaze unwavering. I owe you an apology, Mrs. Reed, he said, his voice low and resonant. I haven't been entirely truthful with you. Samantha felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. What other secrets had he been keeping? I wasn't shell-shocked, Davies continued. Not in the way you thought. I was playing a role I'd been playing for years. He paused, taking a deep breath. I was part of the operation, he said. The operation to silence Leon Carter. To cover up Hawthorne's treachery. Samantha gasped, stunned by this revelation.
But why? She asked.
Why would you do that? You seem to regret it. You pleaded for justice. Davies nodded slowly. I did, he said. And I do. But I had my orders. I was a soldier. I followed orders. Even when those orders sickened me. He explained that he had been part of a special intelligence unit tasked with protecting national security, even if it meant bending the rules, even if it meant breaking the law. He had been assigned to the Hawthorne case to investigate the rumors of a high-level betrayal. But when Leon Carter had presented his evidence, Davies' superiors had ordered him to bury it, to silence Carter, to protect Hawthorne. They said it was for the greater good, Davies said, his voice filled with bitterness. That exposing Hawthorne would damage morale, undermine the war effort. That it would shatter public confidence in the military leadership. But it was a lie, Samantha said.
It was all a lie.
To protect a traitor. To cover up a conspiracy. Davies nodded.
It was, he said.
And I was complicit. I played my part. I helped silence Carter. I helped bury the truth. But after the war, Davies had been haunted by his actions, by the injustice of it all. He had tried to forget, to move on, but the guilt had gnawed at him, eating away at his soul. When you came to me, he said, asking about Carter, I saw a chance. A chance for redemption. A chance to make things right. He had played the role of the shell-shocked soldier, the broken, remorseful veteran, to gain Samantha's trust, to guide her investigation, to ensure that the truth would eventually be revealed. But why the deception? Samantha asked. Why not just tell me everything from the beginning? Davies sighed. I couldn't, he said. I was still bound. By my oath. By my obligations. I couldn't directly betray my former superiors. Even in death. He had needed Samantha to uncover the truth independently, to find the evidence, to build the case. He had used her, manipulated her, to achieve his own ends. But now, he said, the time has come. The time for full disclosure. The time for justice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, metal box. He handed it to Samantha. This, he said, is what you've been looking for. The final proof. The evidence that will expose Hawthorne. And everyone else involved. Samantha took the box, her hands trembling. She opened it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, were photographs, documents, coded messages. The irrefutable evidence of General Hawthorne's treachery. But there was something else, too. Something unexpected. A list. A list of names. The names of other officers, other officials, who had been complicit in the cover-up, who had known about Hawthorne's betrayal, and had chosen to remain silent. Samantha gasped. The conspiracy was far larger, far more extensive, than she had ever imagined. It reached into the highest echelons of the military and political establishment. These names, she said, her voice trembling. These people, they need to be exposed. They need to be held accountable. Davies nodded. They do, he said. And with this evidence they will be. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. Thank you, Mrs. Reed, he said. You have done what I could not. You have brought justice to Leon Carter. And to all those who were betrayed. The betrayal unveiled was not just Hawthorne's, it was the betrayal of an entire system, a system that had prioritized power and reputation over truth and justice. But Samantha, with the help of an unlikely ally, a man who had once been part of the darkness, had finally brought that betrayal to light. The dawn, breaking over Arlington, was not just the start of a new day, it was the dawn of a new era, an era of accountability, an era of truth. Chapter 19. The Gardener's Return. With the contents of the metal box, the definitive proof of General Hawthorne's treachery and the wider conspiracy in her possession, Samantha felt the weight of responsibility, but also the exhilaration of nearing the end of her long and arduous journey. Major Davies's confession, his willingness to finally reveal the full extent of the cover-up, had been the crucial turning point. But there was one more person who deserved to be part of this final act, one more person who had been deeply affected by Leon Carter's fate. Silas Abernathy, the silent groundskeeper, Leon's former handler, the man who had carried the burden of his secret for so many years. Samantha knew that revealing the truth to the public, exposing the conspiracy through the London Chronicle, would be a momentous event, a shockwave that would reverberate through the establishment. She wanted Mr. Abernathy to be there, to witness the culmination of their efforts, to see justice finally served for Leon Carter. She drove to Arlington, to the familiar cottage nestled amidst the graves, the scent of wood smoke and roses still clinging to the air, although the roses were now long gone, faded with the changing season. She found Mr. Abernathy in his garden, not tending to the flowers, but simply sitting on the wooden bench beneath the bare rose arbor, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. He looked up as she approached, his pale blue eyes questioning, but not surprised. He seemed to know, instinctively, that she had come with news, with the final piece of the puzzle. "Mr. Abernathy," Samantha said, her voice filled with emotion. "It's done. We have it. The proof. The evidence. Everything." She told him about Major Davies's confession, about the metal box, about the list of names, about the conspiracy that had reached far beyond General Hawthorne. Mr. Abernathy listened silently, his expression unreadable, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. When she had finished, he remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the ground. "It's a heavy burden, Mrs. Reed," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "The truth, it can be a dangerous thing. But it's also a necessary thing, Mr. Abernathy," Samantha said. "Leon Carter deserved the truth. Thomas deserved the truth. All those who were betrayed, they deserve the truth." She told him about her meeting with the London Chronicle, about their willingness to publish the story, to expose the conspiracy, to hold those responsible accountable. Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly. "The Chronicle," he said. They have courage. They will do what is right." "I want you to be there, Mr. Abernathy," Samantha said. "When the story breaks, when the truth is revealed, you deserve to be there. You were his friend, his handler, his protector." Mr. Abernathy looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness, a profound regret. "I failed him, Mrs. Reed," he said. "I couldn't protect him. I couldn't save him." "You did what you could, Mr. Abernathy," Samantha said. "You kept his memory alive. You guided me. You helped me find the truth." She reached out, gently placing her hand on his arm. "Please," she said, "come with me. To London. To the Chronicle. Be there when the story breaks." Mr. Abernathy hesitated, his gaze drifting to the nearby graves, to the silent stones that marked the resting places of so many fallen soldiers. I don't know, Mrs. Reed," he said. "I'm an old man. I'm used to the silence, to the solitude." "But this is not about silence anymore, Mr. Abernathy," Samantha said. "It's about speaking out. It's about justice. It's about honoring Leon Carter's memory." Mr. Abernathy looked at her, his eyes searching hers. He saw the determination, the unwavering resolve, the grief-stricken mother who had become a relentless seeker of truth. He sighed. "Very well, Mrs. Reed," he said. "I will come with you. I will be there." The next day, Samantha and Mr. Abernathy traveled to London together, a silent journey filled with unspoken emotions, with the weight of the impending revelation. They went to the offices of the London Chronicle, where Mr. Davies was already waiting, his expression resolute, his demeanor no longer that of a broken, shell-shocked soldier, but of a man ready to face the consequences of his past actions. The editor-in-chief, Mr. Arthur Davies, greeted them warmly, his eyes filled with a mixture of respect and anticipation. He led them to a small conference room, where a group of journalists, photographers, and editors were gathered, their faces serious, their expressions focused. Samantha presented the evidence. Leon Carter's diary, the unsent letter, Beatrice Hawthorne's confession, the metal box containing the photographs, documents, and the list of names. Mr. Davies provided his testimony, confirming everything, revealing the full extent of the cover-up, the conspiracy that had reached into the highest echelons of power. Mr. Abernathy remained silent throughout the proceedings, his presence a quiet, powerful testament to the sacrifices made, the secrets kept, the price of loyalty. The journalists listened intently, taking notes, asking questions, their faces reflecting the gravity of the story unfolding before them. They were witnessing history in the making, the unveiling of a truth that would shake the foundations of the establishment, that would rewrite the narrative of the Great War. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Arthur Davies turned to Samantha, Mr. Abernathy, and Major Davies. "We will publish the story tomorrow," he said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. "The truth will be known." Samantha looked at Mr. Abernathy, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. The burden, carried for so many years, was finally being lifted. The silence was broken. The truth was out. And the gardener, the keeper of secrets, had returned to witness the dawn of justice. Chapter 20. A Legacy of Poppies. The publication of the story in the London Chronicle was a seismic event, a shockwave that reverberated through British society, shattering the carefully constructed myths of wartime heroism and exposing the dark underbelly of power and betrayal. The headline screamed, "Traitor in our midst, General Hawthorne exposed," and the accompanying articles laid bare the full extent of the conspiracy, the silencing of Leon Carter, the cover-up orchestrated by a network of high-ranking officials. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Outrage, disbelief, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal swept through the nation. The image of General Hawthorne, once a celebrated hero, was shattered, replaced by the stark reality of a man who had sold his country for personal gain. The authorities were forced to act. An official inquiry was launched, investigations were initiated, and the names on the list, the individuals complicit in the cover-up, were called to account. Some were disgraced, some were prosecuted, and some, like Hawthorne, were posthumously condemned, their reputations forever tarnished. Samantha Reed, the quiet, grieving widow who had embarked on a relentless quest for truth, became an unlikely heroine, a symbol of courage, determination, and the unwavering power of a mother's love. She was lauded for her bravery, her persistence, her refusal to be silenced, her unwavering commitment to justice for Leon Carter and her son, Thomas. Major Alistair Davies, the man who had once been part of the darkness, found a measure of redemption in his confession, in his willingness to expose the truth and face the consequences of his past actions. He became a key witness in the official inquiry, providing crucial testimony that helped to unravel the complex web of deceit. Silas Abernathy, the silent groundskeeper, the keeper of secrets, returned to Arlington, to the quiet solitude of the cemetery, but he was no longer burdened by the weight of unspoken truths. He had witnessed the dawn of justice, the fulfillment of a promise made to a grieving mother, the honoring of a brave young soldier's memory. Samantha, too, returned to Arlington, to the small cottage where her journey had begun, to the familiar paths, to the silent stones that marked the resting places of so many fallen soldiers. She visited Leon Carter's bench, the place where the unseen footprints had first drawn her into the mystery, the place where the white rose, tied with a black ribbon, had signaled the final clue. She sat on the bench, the cold stones seeping through her dress, the silence of the cemetery pressing in on her, but it was a different silence now, a silence no longer filled with unspoken questions, with the weight of hidden grief. It was a silence of peace, of resolution, of acceptance. She had found the truth. She had brought justice to Leon Carter. She had exposed the treachery of General Hawthorne. She had honored the memory of her son, Thomas. She had done all that she could, but the journey had changed her. She was no longer the quiet, grieving widow, lost in the shadows of the past. She had become a seeker of truth, a fighter for justice, a woman who had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, more resilient, more determined. She looked out at the vast expanse of the cemetery, at the rows upon rows of white crosses and headstones, each marking a life lost, a story untold. She thought of Leon, of Thomas, of all those who had been betrayed, of all those who had suffered in silence. She knew that the scars of the war, the wounds inflicted by betrayal and loss, would never fully heal. But she also knew that truth, like the poppies that bloomed in the fields of Flanders, could emerge from the darkest of places, a symbol of remembrance, a testament to the enduring power of hope. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small packet of poppy seeds. She had purchased them earlier that day, a symbolic gesture, a final act of remembrance. She walked along the rows of graves, scattering the seeds, letting them fall where they may, a silent promise that the sacrifices made, the lives lost, would never be forgotten. That the truth, once revealed, would continue to blossom, a legacy of poppies, a testament to the enduring power of love, loyalty, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The world would remember not just the official heroes, but the quiet ones, the betrayed ones, whose stories deserve to be told. And Samantha would carry their stories with her, always. Epilogue. Years passed. The tumultuous events surrounding the exposure of General Hawthorne and the wartime conspiracy faded from the headlines, becoming a footnote in the history books, a cautionary tale of power, betrayal, and the enduring quest for truth. Samantha Reed remained in Arlington, her small cottage a sanctuary, a place of quiet contemplation, a haven filled with memories. She continued her daily walks through the cemetery, her presence a familiar sight to the groundskeepers and the occasional visitors who came to pay their respects to the fallen. Leon Carter's bench, nestled beneath the sprawling oak, became her special place, a place of remembrance, a place of connection to the young soldier whose story had changed her life. She would often sit there, gazing out at the vast expanse of graves, her thoughts drifting back to the long and arduous journey that had brought her to this point. She had received letters, countless letters, from people all over the country, thanking her for her courage, her determination, her unwavering pursuit of justice. Some were from families of soldiers who had died in the war, seeking information, seeking closure, seeking a connection to their lost loved ones. Others were from ordinary citizens, expressing their gratitude, their admiration, their profound respect for her unwavering commitment to truth. Samantha answered every letter, offering comfort, sharing information, providing a listening ear, a compassionate heart. She became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, truth and justice could prevail. She also kept in touch with Major Alistair Davies, who had retired from the military and was living a quiet life in the countryside, seeking solace in the anonymity of rural existence. He had found a measure of peace, a sense of redemption in his confession, in his contribution to exposing the conspiracy. Mr. Abernathy, the silent groundskeeper, remained in his cottage, tending to his roses, his presence a quiet, reassuring constant in Samantha's life. He rarely spoke of the past, of the secrets he had kept, but his eyes, his pale blue eyes, held a depth of understanding, a shared knowledge of the sacrifices made, the price of loyalty. One spring morning, Samantha went to Leon Carter's bench, as she did every day. The sun was shining, the sky was a brilliant blue, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. She noticed something different, something unexpected. Growing around the base of the bench, amidst the green grass, were poppies. A small cluster of vibrant red poppies, their delicate petals swaying gently in the breeze. Samantha smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. She had scattered poppy seeds, years ago, a symbolic gesture, a final act of remembrance. But she had never seen them bloom, not here, not in Arlington. She knelt down, her fingers gently touching the velvety petals. They were a sign, a message, a reminder that even in the most unlikely of places, hope could blossom, truth could prevail, and the memory of those who had been lost would endure. The poppies, a legacy of Leon Carter, of Thomas Reed, of all those who had been betrayed, of all those who had suffered in silence. A legacy of remembrance, a testament to the enduring power of love, loyalty, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. A legacy that Samantha Reed, the quiet, grieving widow who had become a seeker of truth, a fighter for justice, would carry with her, always. The unseen footprints had led her on an incredible journey. And, at its conclusion, the most beautiful of flowers had appeared, confirming that her efforts had not been in vain. The end.